All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Revive webinar by the Global Antimicrobial Research and Development Partnership, GARDP. My name is Astrid Pence-Moore, and I'm hosting today's session about project management in antimicrobial drug R&D. Revive is GARDP's education and outreach program, and it aims to connect and support the antimicrobial research and development community worldwide. This webinar is part of our educational activities. And as all our webinars, it will be recorded and will be made available on our website, revive.gardp.org/webinars. As a matter of fact, it's actually our 5-year anniversary of the series. And since the beginning, we have hosted 60 webinars, which are all still available for you to watch. And most of them are still highly relevant. So I recommend for you to have a look and see what else has been broadcasted in the past. On the website, we also have other forms of content, as for example, the Antimicrobial Viewpoint articles and the Antimicrobial Encyclopedia. This resource provides short definitions for important terms in the field, which are then further complemented with external links for additional reading, and some terms are explained by expert videos. As always, you can ask questions in this webinar. We will have a Q&A session after our 2 presentations, but you can send your questions at any time during the webinar by adding them in the questions window in your webinar control panel. And at the end, we will do our best to answer as many as possible. If at all possible, please include the person who you address your question to, the name. Today's webinar was developed in collaboration with INCATE, the incubator for antibacterial therapies in Europe. Okay, so our speakers today are Christina Orling from Ligature and Julie Miralves, my colleague at GARDP. The moderator is Sina Gerbach. Sina is the Deputy Head and Development Lead of the Transfer Group Anti-Infectives at the Leibniz Institute of Natural Product Research and Infection Biology, and she's a Program Manager at INCATE. Her interdisciplinary and intercultural expertise in project planning, portfolio and stakeholder management developed through several positions in academic research consortia, but also in drug development programs with private-public partnerships. She holds a PhD in cell biology from the University of Dresden, which was complemented by postdoctoral positions in Uppsala, Sweden, and Max Planck Institute in Dortmund in Germany. Welcome, Sina. I'm now handing over to you. Please switch on your webcam.
Thank you, Astrid. And welcome, everyone. I hope you can hear me all.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to our webinar today on project management in antimicrobial drug R&D. And let me start maybe with a short introduction on INCATE, actually quite new on the scene incubator, public-private partnership that supports specifically antimicrobial resistance-related innovations. And does this since approximately 2 years, so it's quite a new incubator. And what we want to do is actually to support the transfer of academic discoveries into investable biotech startups. And with this, we aim to recover a viable ecosystem that encourages young investigators to invest their time and money and their research into the AMR field, although the economy behind this field is rather poor at the moment. So we aim for curing a currently insufficient clinical development pipeline with this. And how do we do this? We support innovative concepts in the AMR field, not only with funding, but mainly also with advice and community. And this is not to be underestimated, because this is the first steps that, for example, academic research groups need to enter the field and to get thinking about founding a startup company. So we try to bridge the academic mountain on the other one side, with biotech and pharma industry on the other side. And exactly. And when you look around the funding landscape, there was a gap for these very early projects who are just evolving from academia, but still are not, let's say, de-risked enough to be interesting for larger or for other funding possibilities that are around. So INCADE tries also here to fill this gap of this funding. And when you now think, okay, your project could be something for INCADE, or you would like to support us as partners, then please don't hesitate to contact us. It's very easy via these channels here, and we are happy to get in contact with you. And this is all for now for INCADE. So we come now to our actual topic for today, and we have two experts today with us, with extensive experience actually in handling international projects and also teams. So please welcome with me Christina Olling from Ligature, who will be our first speaker today, and also Julie Miralves from GARD-P, who will be the second speaker. And starting with Christina, she has extensive international experience in all aspects of drug discovery, of drug development and medical technology from over 20 years of collaborative research. And she has a particular interest in medicinal chemistry and infectious diseases. She works at Ligature, where she leads the global health project portfolio and has been in different leading roles in a wide range of complex public-private partnerships. For example, was she the coordinator of a highly financed IHI GNA Now project. She holds a PhD in medicinal chemistry and a master in chemical engineering. And she will give the first talk today. And Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sina, for the kind introduction. And I'm really excited to share a little bit of my experience from more than 15 years of managing collaborative research projects in primarily for infectious diseases. And as Sina also mentioned, also with AMR directed projects. So I want to mention that the collaborative project is based on two pillars. There's the scientific plan, the scientific objective that is driving the innovation and the research, but there's also the non-scientific part. And this is often what is overlooked because the focus is so much on the science. But to be successful, it is important to have those both parts present. And when we talk about the non-scientific part, it's about the governance, legal, IP, finance, dissemination, publication, communication, data management, and stakeholder engagement, for example. So you could say that this defines the scientific defines the input, while the non-scientific part, the project management, is defining the outcome. And at Ligature, we've found it to get these bubbles together, to converge them, and to optimize the outcomes of projects. So all of us, all of my colleagues have, almost all, I should say, have a scientific background, all program managers and project leaders. We've been in charge of more than 100 projects, varying in size from 1 million to 200 million euros, with several partners. I think here it says more than 200. I wonder if it's not more. Some projects have like 30, 40 project members, but we've also had smaller projects with just a few, like a handful of members. We're working with projects all around the world, but because we're based in Netherlands, we have quite a lot of European projects and Dutch projects, I should say as well, although almost all of them are international when it comes to project partners. We were founded by the Dutch government, not as Ligature, but two other organizations, Top Institute Pharma, where I come from, and Center for Translational Medicines and Molecules. And we're a not-for-profit organization. So I will talk a little bit why we think that an organization like Ligature is needed. Here I mentioned or showing a little bit of the project logos that I am involved in. For example, GINA Now, which is part of the European AMR Accelerator under Innovative Health Initiative. But also like the big European lead factor, which is really early drug discovery, Momentum, which is a more registry for medtech, AI for NTD, which is a diagnostic device development for NTDs, so neglected tropical diseases, and a few others. What we've been seeing, so Ligature started very much working to get industry and academia working closer together, also involving small to medium-sized enterprises and biotechs. But what we see today is that collaboration with all types of stakeholders have intensified the past few years. We see that, for example, big tech is moving into the health sector. We see that charities are taking a more active role in driving agendas of development projects or discovery projects. We find that patient organizations are being more and more included and also recognized as full partners in research and policy projects. And also that regulators are getting more involved at the research and innovation frontier and also taking part of it. But there are also additional factors that have become higher on the agenda, such as when we talk about AMR, which are relevant there, I think it's health inequality and health equity, but also environmental sustainability, because it's so closely related to the One Health, where we see that what you do to breeding stocks for meat and milk production, for example, has an influence on resistant bacterial strains. But also other things that have come into play, such as open science, much higher demand on sharing results, and very relevant for this field, the new models for reimbursement. But we also see that we need to make changes on a more systemic level. How do we get patients involved? What do we do with data? How can we make sure that it's fair, that it's findable, accessible, and reproducible? Artificial intelligence, highly relevant, and how can we make sure that innovation also reaches the most vulnerable populations on our globe? So today I want us to discuss how to handle complex projects, and I hope you will have a lot of questions at the end, because it's very difficult to summarize in 20 slides and 20 minutes. So I think all of us, we start with an idea, and I want to discuss today how we can make that idea a success by proper project management. So often there is a project scientific proposal, sometimes it's a reaction on a call, or you have an idea for a good medical solution, a good and new antibiotic drug, for example, or a diagnostic. And for that, and then you need to define the scope. How far can we get that? That's a little bit how you define a project. And I want to discuss that. And then you build your partnership or the group, the team that will work on it, and you execute that project. And we will talk today a little bit about the scope generation, but also primarily about the project execution, because that is really what project management is. So why is it so important to collaborate, and why am I stressing that in talk about project management? Well, I'm fully convinced that today's medical and societal changes are too big for one single organization to solve. So we need to join forces, and this is so relevant for AMR. But when you do so, I think it's very important to be transparent about the reasons for partnership. Very often it is to access additional expertise, that another group have that expertise that you need. But it could also be to increase efficiency and reduce costs, and to accommodate multi-stakeholder interactions, that you just need more input, that you enlarge your network by partnering with other organizations. And maybe together you can access additional or alternative funding sources, but also to be able to share data, compounds, technologies, and not the least risks. So what is a project actually? Well, a project is always defined, and this is different from other things. For example, different from an organization. A project is defined by three components. It's defined by time, by a budget, and the quality that you want to achieve. And that defines the scope of this particular project. But of course, you also have you always need to have an objective for a project. What do you want to achieve? And I think maybe for many of you, it is to eventually get a new efficacious drug against bacterial or microbial infections. So, but there are also other factors that influence this. And I think it jumped one slide, sorry. I will go back. So when we build the project, we need to take these three things in consideration: the time, the budget, and the quality. And the best way I see it is to start from both ends. Where are we now, and what do we want to achieve? And think about what needs to happen in between. How can we achieve our dream, our goal, from where we are right now, and divide to identify the activities, divide them into tasks. And quite often it is helpful to kind of assemble them in work packages. And the ones of you who have worked, for example, on European funded projects, you will recognize that you almost always have work packages that kind of assembles. It can be very often a multidisciplinary team. It could consist of one partner or several partners, but they have a very close relationship and interdependency. And then for each task, it's good to define what is the deliverable and how is that deliverable feeding into the ultimate objective. And to be able to monitor this, it's good also to have milestones. And the milestones can also help you to define the tasks and the activities. And then the big question comes, who can execute? Who will be successful, or most likely to be successful, to execute those tasks? And who should be responsible? And this is where the component of expertise come in. But we have also other factors that influence the project. And those are stakeholders. And they can be internal stakeholders, but it can also be external stakeholders. It can be risks to time, to budget, to the quality, but it can also be competitors. It can be things that are totally out of your influence, such as an epidemic outbreak or political instability. I mentioned competitors. Competitors can also be in the corner of the benefits and opportunities, and this is important to recognize, and very important for optimizing the outcomes of a project. And these are my thoughts about what I think that we can do in a drug research development project when it comes to addressing stakeholders. First of all, it's really important to recognize who are the stakeholders and who are the most important, who are the key stakeholders. And here the network of the project partners and tapping into their experience is very important. And you can also engage the key stakeholders at advisory board members. And they don't always have to be the scientific. It doesn't always have to be scientists. For example, it's very good to include, I find, patient representatives or patient advocacy delegates in an advisory board to get that angle, or frontline healthcare workers. And when it comes to risks, monitoring the project, seeing if you are aligned with milestones and with your deliverables is very important, as well as at early stage and on a regular term, to look at what could be the risks, upcoming risks, and what are already think early on, what are the mitigation measures. And that can also help you, for example, recognize if there are any gaps in your scope, in the expertise of the project members. And when it comes to benefits and opportunities, I think it's important to use the collective intelligence of the project partners and your advisory board members to be aware of what's happening around, what's happening in your ecosystem, and also incorporate agility in how you make decisions, and how you manage the project. We'll talk a little bit how you can do that later on. So building a successful partnership for collaborative project is really to be clear about the objectives, be clear about what is the main goal, what do we want to achieve, and have a project plan with clear timelines and tasks per partner. Make realistic budgets for the partner. Often this, if you react on a call proposal or call, you have a certain framework, but don't overpromise what you can do. Be transparent. and be aware and acknowledge imbalances. Also, for example, if you have a very dominant partner who is putting a lot of stake into it, it's better to acknowledge that than to try to ignore it. And then try to make the end results as concrete as possible. And this way, I'm quite sure that you can find a win-win for all partners. I would also mention that there is no typical partnership. There are so many different types of collaborations. I mean, they can be one-to-one, it can be with support from one private partner, or it can be in collaboration with a private partner or other funding agency. The focus can be very different. It can be country specific, it can be global, it can include low and middle income countries. I'm sorry, I used an abbreviation here. It can be private funding, it can be public funding. It can engage an NGO with industry, industry academia, industry with industry, or public-private partnerships. And we should also be aware of that the dynamic changes when a project or a health technology, a medical solution is maturing. So if you start with early drug research, it will have, you saw the slide from Sina with the different development stages of a drug or a diagnostic. And the closer to the patient you come, the stakes are getting higher, and that will impact the collaboration. You will have higher investments probably. You will have, you probably need to change, or you should change staff, because you need new competencies, new expertise, and new experiences. But you will also engage more people and more stakeholders. And for the partners, the strategic importance will increase as well. And it's something to be very aware of. One example is, for example, a project that Ligature has been running since 2012, which is developing a pediatric drug for schistosomiasis. And it's an old drug, but it never had it was not apt for really young children. So this project has actually gone from preclinical, because they decided to just use one of the epimers of the drug. So it needed to do quite a lot of preclinical work, and then gone through clinical phase 1, 2, 3, and now moved into the access stage, which has meant that a lot of the people who were doing the research in 2000 not at all involved any longer. I also want to just say a word of caution that we do need to, there are quite a lot of challenges, and we need to manage expectations. And I love this quote because it's so true, that most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 5 years. And what effect does this have? Well, what I've noticed is that you have a lot of enthusiasm in the beginning when you start a project, but then after a year or so, people are thinking, we're not coming anywhere. We didn't even get started, and we had so high expectations on this, and they can lose enthusiasm for it. But it's just to be aware that this is how it is, and that it takes time before it takes off. I should say that Bill Gates, who I quoted, he actually talked about 10 years, but I think 5 years, you really see how much is happening after 5 years. So this is why I crossed it out. One of the biggest challenges when you have collaborative projects, but also high-stake projects in any way, is that when we come to interdisciplinary activities, it's important to build trust. We're a lot of different people. We think differently. We might come from very different cultures, but also just different behaviors. And some things that I think is helping to overcome this is to give a clear structure to the project. This will give transparency and predictability, and that creates trust, and also accountability, that you know who's responsible for what, and to that you need a governance structure. My recommendation is always to have like a governance structure at least 3 levels, so you can escalate if questions, biggest questions arise. Typically, you have a work package with a work package lead. They can handle a certain level of questions. Then you will have a management team who can oversee that, and a steering committee, for example. Quite often in the bigger projects, we also need a general assembly, so every partner can have a voice in really important questions that will influence them individually. And this also helps with the decision-making process, and that is defined. Who has the mandate to take what type of decisions? You need a legal framework. How do we collaborate together? And that will include IP, for example. What really helps is infrastructure. So you have, for example, a safe and secure way of sharing documents, knowledge, and data. And a simple thing like meeting routines. Another aspect that I think is key in a successful project is efficacious communication. And this creates awareness, the awareness I was talking about before, also awareness about the different partners, their expertise, for example, but also their personal interests. I think you need to be aware of that. But it also creates horizon to look beyond where you're at in the project right now and see the further picture where you're heading. So it's important to have that communication internally within the partnership, but also to upper management of the collaboration partners, because your collaboration partners will be affected by that. And of course, externally to all stakeholders, it's important to take time and identify those stakeholders. And to overcome that enthusiasm dip that I showed on the previous slide, it's good to recognize early progress and successes, to understand that we're making progress even if we couldn't jump to the ultimate goal immediately. And it of course is extremely important for knowledge exchange. But we should also be aware of that there are different phases of the collaboration, and this is very cultural, but we should not be afraid of having different meanings. I think in those interfaces, that's where the real creative thoughts are arising. Dr. Bruce Tuckman, he said, you probably heard this before, the forming, norming, storming, performing phases, and then adjourning. This is what you do in the wrap-up after a project has taken place. But the forming is often very enthusiastic. You've written your proposal, you got the grant, you're full of enthusiasm. Then you start working a little bit, you start to collate as a group. Then you have the storming phase. This is where the amplitude of the discussions are going high. You might be really irritated with your project partners. You can't influence them. But normally that is a phase. And it's good to be aware of it. And those are needed. you need to overcome it. You need to align your those discussions to be performing, to get productive. But often, well, it will come. Sorry. But to overcome that, it's also good to acknowledge our differences. I put here the book, The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. I really liked it. It's not so focused on low and middle income countries. It's more about the big economies in the world, but it gives a little bit of insight. There's also these type of behavioral categorizations. I've mentioned here the book Surrounded by Idiots by Thomas Erickson, that is highlighting, you know, how you can deal with extremely extroverted people or introverted people. There are different types of this. And we should also be aware of that in these interdisciplinary projects, in these more and more complex projects, we have people that comes from a very different educational standpoint when we engage with, for example, researchers, doctors, we engage with lawyers, we engaged with software or software developers or data managers. We have very different cultures, even if we might be born in the same country and brought up in a very similar way. And this can also be applied to different cultures in the company. You might have a company that is extremely agile, or you might have a company that is more conservative and more static, without being negative for that. We just need to acknowledge it and draw the best out of it. Because in the end, we are the ones who will make the change for the globe. So I'm come to the end of my talk, so thank you for listening. I really hope you have a lot of questions.
Thank you very much, Christina, for these very interesting insights and giving a good overview over this very complex topic. And I think here are many points where a deeper discussion could go on later. But remember also to the auditorium that you can ask your questions and you can use the questions window for that. But now we will come first to our second speaker today, which is Julie Miralves, and she joined GARD-P in October 2019 as an R&D portfolio and planning leader, and she is now the head of the R&D portfolio and operations strategy. She developed her expertise in the healthcare industry, but started actually as a senior consultant in Paris, in France. And there she provided support and advice to mainly biotech and pharmaceutical companies, and especially with the focus on innovation funding and also management strategies. She then joined a French biotech company, Ariana Pharma, in Paris as a project manager, and she there took care of the development and operational management of large collaborative R&D programs, then still in oncology and chronic diseases. Before she joined GARD-P, she was a country operations manager at IQVIA, which is in charge, she was in charge of the implementation in France of a novel European oncology data platform in hospitals and clinical centers. And she holds a PhD in immunology from the University Paul Sabatier of Toulouse in France. And she completed, or she also has a postdoctoral position at the École Normale Supérieure, the Collège de France in Paris. And she also has been an independent scientific expert for the IMI2 initiative of the European Commission. So welcome with me, Julie Miralves, and we are looking very much forward to your talk.
Hello everyone, and thanks a lot, Sina, for this introduction. Thanks also to the Revive team who invited me to participate to this webinar today. So addressing key challenges in project management for drug development projects is a broad topic, obviously, and there is no unique way or no unique solution to address these challenges. So what I would like to do today is really to share with you some of my thoughts based on my practical experience. And I will focus on some specific aspects which are particularly important for me, related to what is the best approach for designing a project management framework, the importance of building a collaborative and cross-functional team, and beyond planning, anticipating on change through forecasting and scenario developments. So first, I will start with some of the specificities and key challenges of drug development project. This kind of project differ from other type of projects, from other industry, due to their specific natures. And I flag there some of the key characteristics of this project, which have an impact on the way of designing and managing them, and which have an impact on the approaches that you will have in terms of project management. So first of the key elements which distinguish the drug development project to other project is really the complex scientific and medical expertise and requirements to be able to run such type of project. It requires multiple specialized and cross-functional expertise and a systematic and holistic scientific approach. So these elements are part of the key foundation for the project management. And for that, you will need to have an integrated development project plan. As mentioned, Christina, just before, it's not only the scientific element, but also the non-scientific element, which need to be part of this integrated plan. And you need to have a strong multidisciplinary and cross-functional team. You need a clear governance, clear communication route and reporting channel, and all these key elements will allow you to have an efficient collaboration between your team members and to ensure that they will permanently be aligned against the scope and the objective of the project. So this complexity needs really to be managed thoroughly within your project management approach and framework. In comparison to other type of projects, also drug development projects are run under strict quality and regulatory rules. So complying to these requirements is crucial, and it requires to identify them very early stage of your development and to fully embed them in your project plan and your strategy. You need to maintain an up-to-date knowledge on the latest regulatory guidelines and to ensure you are continuously adhering to them. So having a strong QMS and dedicated team to ensure the safety and the regulatory compliance is really mandatory for this type of project, and add an additional complexity to compare to other industry and to the project context. Due to the multiple expertise required and the technicality, as Christiana mentioned also before, nowadays all drug development projects are mainly run in the context of partnership and collaboration. Christina's really well described that, so I won't go in detail there, but this is really important also to understand that this specific alliance, public-private partnerships, research consumption are an additional source of complexity in terms of project management. And you need to make sure you manage all the different interests, objectives, priorities, and contribution amongst diverse types of partners and stakeholders. And this is quite challenging in the context of managing drug development project.
designing and developing new drugs is also a very long process compared to other projects. It's required 10 to 15 years in average, and even sometimes more. So managing a project over such long time period is particularly challenging, and it requires to have a strong approach to timelines management. So as mentioned, Christina, also in the initial design and definition of your project, is quite important to clearly define the different activity in manageable elements, to identify their dependencies as an interconnection, and to define all the interim steps like deliverable milestone, which will allow you to monitor the progress, and to identify your go and no-go gates that will allow you to adapt and to follow your progression. So planning and forecasting, they are really cornerstone of good project management approach for drug development project. And, oops, sorry. So developing new drugs is obviously highly expensive, and this creates also a significant challenge to all type of organization. So developing a comprehensive budget and implementing strong financial monitoring process are quite important. You have to seek for cost optimization, securing diversifying the source of funding, and all these elements are quite important to make sure that you can ensure the appropriate level of funding for the whole period of your drug development project. And at least, and this is one of the main characteristics compared to other projects, is that drug development project is at high risk, high uncertainty, and high failure rates. So it means that for your drug development project, you need to have in place an efficient risk management and contingency strategy. It needs to be permanently monitored, and your mitigation action need to be fully implemented and continuously monitored through the whole life cycle of your project if you want to maximize the chance of success of your project. So these are common key challenges and characteristics for drug development project. And obviously, sorry again, we have additional layer of complexity for antimicrobial drug development project. I've mentioned here some of them which have a clear impact on the way you will set your project management approach and you will follow your program. But obviously there are more of that, and I'm not mentioning today the phases related to the market access and the commercialization of antimicrobial drug. We know that we are facing also there huge challenges in terms of drug implementation. So if we are looking here at some of the specificity which increase the complexity of defining, planning, and managing such project, one of the first hurdle is really related to the antimicrobial resistance. So the diverse mechanism of resistance, their variable prevalence within the target population, also the dynamic of the change of the resistance patterns across this population, across geographies and over time, it has really an impact on the project strategy and its implementation. This requires to conduct thorough surveillance prevalence study and to have a specific attention to pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic of these drugs, which is an additional complexity compared to other type of drug development. And in this context of resistance and the emergence of new resistance mechanism over time, identifying new mechanism action for the drugs are also becoming increasingly complex. So in this particular scientific setting, we are also facing a lot of challenge and unique challenge which are linked to the design and of the clinical trials and the recruitment of the population, patient population for antimicrobial drug. I've listed here some of these unique challenges, mainly related to the heterogeneity of the infectious disease, the variability of the resistance and susceptibility partners in the target population, the potential emergence of resistance during the full period of the development, which is quite long, the complexity of determining the appropriate control group and selecting the right study population. So with such complex clinical trials, it's also very difficult to enroll patients who meet the specific enrollment criteria. And particularly for infection with low incidence or which are resistant to the standard of care, including vulnerable population like pregnant women and children is also quite challenging and raise ethical consideration. So we have an additional scientific medical complexity, challenges in clinical trial implementation, which increase even more the risk of failures and the risk of delays and extra cost for antimicrobial drug development. Antimicrobial development also face a specific regulatory landscape, which is quite changing, involving, and which is a bit different compared to other disease area and therapeutic area. We face here a quite diversity amongst regulatory authority in terms of requirements for antimicrobials, and this is particularly challenging to comply to this diverse requirements through the long life cycle of the different project. It's then really challenging to maintain the knowledge related to the regulatory landscape and to permanently comply to it when it's quite evolving and changing over the years. So as I mentioned just before, it's really important and crucial to implement proper regulatory approach within the project strategy and within the project management. So to be able to address these different challenges, it's important to implement a project management approach which is really tailored for your own project specificity, its own challenges, and its own context. One of the key principles to keep in mind when designing and developing your project management approach is that project management is both a function and a framework. So it's a function in the sense that it's a discipline with embodied by project manager or project leader or program manager, and who is really part and must be fully embedded in the project team with clear roles and responsibility. And we must have a leadership role and also an authority in terms of key decision for the project. So this is a function part of the project, like you can have clinical operation, regulatory function, medical function, but it's also a framework. So it means that as a framework, it must be deployed across all functions, across all work streams, and also within the organization. It's a combination of principle and practical tools, approaches, and process, and it provides a common structure to make sure that you will be able to implement efficiently your project, to be able to monitor it, to control it, and to make it evolve also over time. So one of the key elements for a successful project management approach is really to foster this project management culture and mindset across every team member, and not only in the function and within the project management professional. So based on this vision of this double approach for project management, function and framework, you need then to identify for your own project what are the key characteristics and what is the most suitable for your own project. So in terms of approach and key step to design your appropriate project management approach, obviously, the first step is to clearly identify the goals, the scope, deliverable, and expected outcome of the project. Christina has really well described the key main element on how to design the scope and how to design your project. And this must really be embedded in an integrated development project plan, which include all aspects, all work streams, not only the technical one, but also the non-technical, which are related, for example, to your legal framework, to your collaboration with partners, vendors, your communication also. So you need to have really a comprehensive view of what are your project objectives and of the different elements which will be part of it. So based on this integrated development plan, you will then be able to really assess what are the specific characteristics of your projects, how it differs from other projects that you would have in the past. You will identify the constraints, the specific environment, and the key main elements in terms of expertise you will require. It will help you to identify what are the internal and external stakeholders. As I mentioned before, nowadays we are even working more in the context of collaboration and partnerships, and we need to work closely with regulatory authority, advocacy groups, to interact with key stakeholders in countries, in the clinical practice. So all your external stakeholders will also have an impact on the way you will set your project management approach. And obviously, your project will also be controlled by its own organization, by your structure. You won't have exactly the same approach if you are working in a small organization or a big pharma company or an academic research organization. Based on the identification of all your key characteristics, you will then be in a situation where you can assess what will be the most suitable for you in terms of project management methodology. You will find in the project management literature a lot of different types of approaches. You have the classical waterfall, agile, Scrum, Kanban. You can have a critical path method, the PMBOK and PRINCE2. So you have a huge diversity of methodology and principles of project management. And what is really recommended for drug development projects is to have an hybrid approach. So really to pick and choose from this different methodology what will be adapted to your project, and to develop your project management approach really on a tailored made process. There is no one-size-fits-all methodology for project management, and you need to be creative and to develop what is needed for your project. Key of the element will be to remain collaborative, flexible, and to have simple self-explanatory tools for your team. As I mentioned before, this is a framework which is not only a part of the whole of the project management team, but this framework has to be used and fully embedded in all your team for all your experts. So having this hybrid approach based on the combination of multiple principles and tools, it will really allow you to respect the specificity and the requirements of your project and of all the functions. So then you will be at the stage of the implementation of your project management framework. Christina just showed some of the key elements of the key pillar of project management. So you will have your project management plan with all the tools and process, and which will be the common structure for your project teams. So managing the timelines, the budgets, the resources, the scope, the quality, content, all the stakeholder, your communication. So this is really the classical elements of the project management plan, and where you need to have a key focus, and I will go through some of these elements a bit more in detail just after this slide. It's really on the governance, so defining the structure of your team, the respective roles, responsibility, and how they will communicate and work together, including with your external stakeholders. You will have to define a clear model of monitoring and controlling of your project, and you need to have a continuous approach of change, not only for your project, but also for the project management framework by itself. That's why an hybrid approach, a flexible approach, is really important. You will be able to adapt your tool and your vision of the project management according to the progression of your project and its own change, its own internal dynamic. You have to remain flexible and to be able to include the change and implement the change in alignment with the progression of your project. So one of the key element here is really to be able to be flexible and to embed all your expertise required, is really to build a collaborative and cross-functional team on a model that can evolve with time and which can evolve with the progression of your project. So one of the usual approach for drug development projects is called the one project approach, which help to break the silos between functions and discipline, and to have a flexible, collaborative, cross-functional team model. Basically, this revolves around having a core project team, which gathers the key functional expertise needed to make the core element of your project progress. The composition obviously depends on the specific objective of your project, of its own challenges. You have an extended project team, which is gathering all the supportive function, not only the technical element, but all the structure, the organizational structure, which will be there to support the deployment of your project. And you will have also specific task force or the project team. We will handle specific work stream where you require for a short-term time period to have a specific focus on a given technical perimeter of expertise. So based on this composition of the core, extended, specific task form, it helps you really to be efficient in the implementation of your project. But when having small group very dedicated to a specific objective, a specific work stream, it will provide you a bit more of efficiency. It will be also easier to communicate across your project and to manage your governance, because you will have a representation in your core project team, extended project team from all the functions. So this flexible model really allows to have the full representation of all the multidisciplinary cross-functional expertise that you need for the implementation of your project, and to maintain all these supportive functions really active and engaged in your project. You need to have clear role and responsibility. That is key, and Christina mentioned that also just before. And beyond the usual role responsibility matrix, as Horace is one of these examples, you really need to emphasize also the ownership and give a clear empowerment to individuals. It's really important that beyond who is responsible, it's to define who will lead the activity, who will be actually the doer of the task, and who are the active contributor. And in situation of delegation, this empowerment must be really clear also. People within your team needs to feel to be empowered and having the ownership and the capacity to take decision on their scope of responsibility. And what needs to be clearly defined is what are the reciprocal expectations between your team members. A RACI is quite static often, and people have different interpretation of it. So it's really important to open the dialogue and to identify what are the reciprocal expectations between your team members and function, and to regularly review, update, and maintain a clarity on this role and responsibility. Obviously, all these elements need to be supported by a strong governance and clear communication rule. The governance will help you really to define what are the decision-making roles at multiple levels, at the level of the individual, at the level of the different project teams, and at the level of the organization, including at the level of your collaboration with your partners. So having also this matrix of decision-making roles is quite important, and it will also make clear the elements that needs to be escalated to other level to be able to more efficiently address issues and potential conflicts or misalignment between stakeholders or between functions. So having clear decision-making roles and clear reporting communication process are quite important, and they must be two-way, bottom-up and top-down, because it's really also important in your communication process and in your communication flow to make sure that any decision, any change adopted and decision taken is communicated back to each team member and at each level of your governance. So you have to make sure that your communication is not only one way, it's not only bottom-up reporting, but you have a clear feedback communicated to the operational teams. And I will finish this presentation today on one of the topic which is quite important from my perspective, to manage really long-term project timelines. For such long-term project, you need really to have a dynamic approach of planning beyond the classical approaches, because you need to integrate all the future potential changes of outcomes, your risk and your uncertainty within your project planning. So the classical approach is usually well known by each project team. So based on your integrated development project plan, which is your starting point, you will define and break down your project into manageable workstream, task, your milestone deliverable. This is quite classical. You go no-go decision gate. So you will have your detailed roadmap. You will set the timelines for each of them. You will identify your dependency. And usually what is done is that based on this flow of task and dependency of task, you will identify your critical paths, which will have an impact on the world duration of your project. But you also need to have more than just a linear view of your planning. You also need to identify your nodes, which are key potential tension element, for example, in terms of resource allocation or funding requirements. So you will have your critical paths and your key nodes. This is a quite classical approach of planning. But for long-term project, and particularly for drug development project, you also need to use scenario planning techniques and approach. It will help you to explore different potential future scenario based on your current knowledge and what you can forecast in terms of change of the future, based on your risk, based on your knowledge of the environment and the potential probability of success or failure and of your different outcomes. So you will forecast this potential future condition and potential change of your project. And based on that, it will help you also to take decision, for example, in terms of resource allocation, in one of your scenario, which you think is likely to happen, you have a specific change in terms of an expertise requirement, then you will probably not have the same approach in terms of hiring this resource. You will make a choice between having it in-house or outsource. So having these multiple different scenario and forecasts will help you to anticipate on future change, to prepare on future change, and to be able to quickly react to changing circumstances and to take decision. It's also really important for such long-term project to fully integrate your risks within your planning. You need to identify what are the tasks and deliverables at risk, to similarly to the scenario planning, simulate what will be the alternative timelines, the changes on your project planning, and based on that, to be able to then integrate, as doing a retro planning, all your mitigation and contingency activity within your project management plan and your timelines. Obviously, this is a dynamic exercise. It must be continuously monitor, adjust with planning forward, backwards, assessing the impact of changes, and permanently maintaining your project timelines based on the actual implementation of your project. And I will stop there for today. So thank you for everybody, and happy to take questions.
Well, thank you very much, Julie, for this great overview, and also getting a taste of what it means to have a project in drug development, especially in the antimicrobials field. And actually, I have already the first questions that I would also direct to you first now, maybe. There is the question, which is very logical, I think, how to start now with project management. What does it need to be a project manager? Does these persons have to be a specific scientific background, or are there courses to become a project manager? So how do I become a project manager, and what are the minimum requirements to become a project manager?
So first of all, for drug development projects, I think project manager, one of their key characteristics is to be generalist, to be able to understand all the scientific needs and requirements within the project. Without being the experts, they need to have an understanding of the full spectrum of expertise and requirements for the development project. So they need to be able to communicate clearly, to understand each of the experts involved. So having a scientific background, for sure, it helps a lot. And without being an expert, it's really important to understand the subject matter expert and what are their needs, what are their constraints, and to be able to dialogue with them. So having this initially this generalist profile is quite important, and then it will be important to be curious and to learn about all the different type of project management methodology which exist. You cannot formal, informal training on those, and then this is really a hands-on job, and you need to practically work with the team, test your approach, improve, evaluate it, adapt it permanently. So it needs to be very flexible. And to have this curiosity to learn from multiple different methodology coming from different industries, to not stick to only one approach, but to be open. And this is something that it be learned by practically working with project teams and by confronting your approach and you work to the reality. So it will be based really on a hands-on experience. And I think that it's you don't have necessarily within a university, for example, specific courses on project management. Usually small module would give you a kind of awareness and sensitivity to those. So this is something that mainly must come from the individual, to be curious, to learn, and to experiment on the ground by working with within project teams.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for this question. And actually, I have a follow-up question. This goes more to Christina here. What if you have now, you said you have more complex teams, intercultural teams, or maybe teams that are partners coming from industry and from academia. So what are your suggestions when you have to deal with teams that have different experiences in project management and have maybe no experiences or just limited experience? How would you deal with this?
I think it's very important that people have a chance to get to know each other because I talked about building trust, and one of them is, of course, to understand the person behind, and to also respect each other for their expertise and how they are, and also I think as a project leader or as a principal investigator, you can show with when it comes to respect, you can show with being the example. People have been chosen to be part of this project because of their because of who they are and what they have accomplished in the past. There's a reason for it. I mean, I personally like, there is a lot of team building activities that you can even do online, and it's good to take time for it in the beginning. I think where the biggest failures I've experienced is where you think that everybody is aligned and taken that for granted and underestimated the complexity and the cultural complexity that comes with a with a complex project. And I think what Julie was mentioning when it comes to training as a project leader, or what characterize a good project leader, I think you really need to like working with people. I mean, you need to love the science as well, but it's a lot about people.
So the main principal asset for any project, this is people. This is a human factor, and what make a project success or fail is really related to the people management and the team management, and making sure that all islands getting together and working in the same direction. So managing the team is one of the key elements of project management, beyond the tools and beyond the trackers. Is to make sure to permanently maintain the team spirit and the motivation and the engagement of people within your internal team and with your stakeholders also, because this engagement is needed from all your partners.
Very true words. I can just confirm that. And we have now more questions coming in, and one of the next is, how would you balance the risk of being so dynamic and flexible? As you described, projects are getting more dynamic, they are getting faster. You have to be flexible to adapt, especially in the antimicrobial field, to regulatory changes. So how can you still hold your project plan actually? How do you make that, how do you create such a flexible atmosphere that you could still have a project management plan and keep your plan, especially also if you have public funding agencies and you depend on them? I don't know, this question goes to both, so maybe Christina, you start on that.
So I think here the agility is very closely related to communication, and it's you have to have efficient ways of internal communication. And as I talked about as well, not only to the people who are directly involved in the project, but also their upper management, so they are on board. And we talked about monitoring, both of us. It's important to have these checkpoints to make sure I mean, it's very seldom that the ultimate goal changes in the type of projects we're involved in. But you need to be able to adopt as you say, the regulatory or the policy landscape is changing. And it's also a question about expectation management, that quite early on you can say what are the variables that are likely to change and what are not. and also make sure that all partners are aware of and have the chance to speak out when there are variables or changes that they would not disagree or that they would not agree upon. And it's a little bit related to your previous question. When you have very big and complex teams that are very diverse, as a project leader, you need to be very aware of that. Also, organizations or people who are more, let's say, introverted, also make sure that they are also heard, and that's an active effort that has to be made.
Very important note here. Thank you for that. Julie, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, what I will add to what Christina just said is that for me, the flexibility will also really come from your project team structure and how you will make sure that changes and unexpected events and are well communicated across your project teams and well escalated. So your team structure and your governance must embed this flexibility in terms of quick escalation, quick decision process, the ability to collectively provide information and support to decision making. And this is really at the level of the team that the dynamic is really important to make sure to be able to quickly adapt and to be flexible.
And to escalate is not a negative thing.
No.
Some people think, I mean, often it's discussed when you have a dispute, but to escalate can really be the way to bring in additional expertise and maybe more, especially when it comes to more strategic decisions. I think a lot of scientists are very stubborn, which is fantastic. Otherwise, we wouldn't have all the innovations that we have in the world. But it can also mean that they can be a little bit slow to escalate things.
Yeah, thank you. And also fitting to this, what do you think, or does complexity increase and also more flexibility is needed because, especially in the antimicrobial field, large pharma companies have withdrawn often their research from antimicrobials, and now it's more the tasks of small startups to develop their new concepts, which have, of course, not all the expertise in one house, but really need help or need to outsource more of the data production, of the business plan manager, of legal personnel, and so on. Would you think that this is a problem for project management, that it gets more complicated because you have more partners involved that are not within one house?
Yeah, for sure it creates complexity. Stakeholders management, partners management, funders management, this is part of an additional burden in terms of project management for sure. But I think in drug development specifically, we are more and more used to work like that, to have multiple partners, and we have good way now to manage this kind of multiple interactions. We learned all by doing, and this is something that is quite usual now within this industry, to really rely on our partners or vendor expertise, to have a balance between in-house and outsource skill sets and expertise. And this choice on balancing in-house and outsource will really come from the specific characteristic of your project, and also when you need a given expertise. Is that long term, is that short term, is that key for your project or not? So everything will be balanced by and driven by the specificity and the technicality of your project. Obviously, it's more complex to have multiple partners, but it has become very crucial and mandatory today to have all the required expertise. It's impossible to have everything in-house.
And I think it's actually, you can see it as an opportunity as well, because you get those, I mean, how should I say, a little bit more innovation, but I think the one of the biggest issues is more the funding. Before you had long-term funding within a big pharma company, there was more patience, and that I think is the biggest change when we move to the small biotechs with investors that are expecting return on a quicker timelines.
And I think we are approaching the end of the webinar, but we have time for one more question. And I actually can cover here two questions from the audience that deal with financing. So how do you see that the difficult financial situation in the AMR field affects the project management specifically in this field? And the second question is that it belongs to that projects are always more expensive in the end than originally planned. So how much buffer would you consider for the project budget, and how do you manage this as % of the original plan? Yeah, so how is the project management, how important is it with this financial situation? Or how do you in general bring together the financial situation with the project management? Maybe Christina, do you want to start on this?
I think Julie was starting, so.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. One of really practical elements is that, in fact, yes, I think this financial uncertainty creates an additional challenge because we don't have the mid-term, long-term visibility on the funding sources, which allow us to really safely launch some of the activities. So one of the key aspects there is really to identify a regular go-no-go stage, this decision gates, where based on the progress of your activity, you can choose if you trigger or not the next phase based on your funding. So it's again really related to integrating in your planning and forecasting every element, including the financial aspect, and to take decision in integrating all the components of your project, the technical aspect, but also the financial funding aspect. And what is quite important is also to balance in-house, outsourced, which give you flexibility, and you have to have step approach also with potentially your vendors to trigger the activity only when you have sufficient funding. It's quite important to have a diversified source of funding also, and to not rely on only one donor, one partner, one investor. So all this financial instability has created more complexity in terms of project management, but we have some tools to mitigate that and some process to mitigate that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have to end here the Q&A session. I thank you all very much. Thanks to our two panelists. Thanks to the host. And thank you also, GARD-P, for collaborating here in this occasion with InCate. And I hand over now to Astrid.
Great. Thank you, Sina, for moderating the webinar and the Q&A. And thanks, Julie and Christina, for your presentations and for staying around for the questions. For the audience, we will share more webinars which are coming up in the future on our website, in our newsletters, and our social media channels. You will also receive a follow-up email to this webinar in a few weeks. It depends sometimes on the materials which we have ready. In this email, you will also receive the link for the recording if you don't find it on the website, any other links if you can make other materials available, and also you will have a download link for a certificate of attendance, because we received this question quite a lot. So there you go. I have two more announcements to make. This is just a save the date, no registration link yet, but we are already planning our antimicrobial chemotherapy conference 2024. This is a free and virtual conference which we organize together with the British Society for Antimicrobial Chemotherapy. And this is taking place on the 6th and 7th of February next year. but you can already mark your calendars. There will also be a call for poster presentations and short oral talks later in the fall. And we currently have applications open for a travel award. This is for researchers in antimicrobial drug discovery and development based in low and middle income countries to help to attend conferences or other training courses. So this is still open for another approximately 2 weeks, and you can find it on our website. And that's all. Again, thank you to the audience, and thank you to our speakers and our moderator, and see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.